Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming to the session today. I'm Kevin Mulhern, co-founder of AdvisorStream, an automated marketing platform for advisors. And if you get a chance, please come by our booth after the session. So we have an outstanding session here today to discuss how advisors can future-proof their communications and their marketing to exceed the expectations of young and older investors. And we have an all-star panel here today. I'll begin with Greg. Greg is the editor-in-chief of Barron's Wealth and Asset Management Group for the last decade. He's also launched the Way Forward podcast, as well as Institutional Investors RIA Intel, and also editor-in-chief of Barrons.com. We have Joy Lere beside me. Joy is a clinical psychologist and co-founder of Shaping Wealth, and she has a very deep understanding of human behavior generally and how people experience money. And she's held positions at Penn Medicine, let me get this right, Penn Medicine, Princeton Health, the Department of Defense, as well as working at George Washington University. And lastly, you have Jason Pereira from Canada, and he is a fintech expert, senior partner at Woodgate Financial. It was a long night last night. Woodgate Financial. And Jason holds several positions, including the Planning Association of Canada. He's also the director of the Institute of Advanced Financial Planning. He's the founder and host of Fintech Impact, with over 280 episodes, and is an advisor to many fintech companies, including my own. And with that said, we'll get started. We're going to focus on 4 findings of some research that we did with Dow Jones. This was a study that we carried out with 1,300 investors in 3 countries, the United States, the UK, and Canada. And it was with investors varying in age, gender, and investable assets. And we'll get started with the topic of younger investors and how there's a common misconception in the industry today that younger investors don't want to work or don't value working with an advisor, and that they would rather choose a robo solution and take a DIY approach to their investing, and that they really don't have any assets or wealth. And lastly, there's lots of studies, but there's a recent one that shows these younger investors, about 87%, say they will not work with their parents' advisor. So with all of that said, we want to open the first question to the panel by asking, how do advisors future-proof themselves by positioning their services to these younger up-and-coming investors while maintaining servicing older demographics? So again, how do advisors future-proof themselves by positioning their services to these up-and-coming and younger investors while maintaining their bread and butter clients? So with that said, why don't we start with Jason?
Sure. So I don't actually look at this problem as any different than the old problem of the spouse being very likely to fire the advisor once the husband dies, right? Very common problem. And you know why that is? Because that advisor is not speaking to the spouse, is not talking about what's important to them, and is not basically including them in the conversation. And that is exactly what's happening with the next generation in just about every situation you come across, right? People tend to gravitate to people in their own age bracket and what they're looking for. And I don't understand these young kids, so I'm not going to try. So is it any surprise that they're not willing to work with mom and dad's guy? Is it any surprise that with all the stuff that they take in regarding what the industry is in the negative side, that essentially they think that, hey, mom and dad are probably getting hosed? Not unusual, right? But that said, at the same time, this is also a generation that is stereotypically seen as valuing lifestyle experience and has been used to delegating just about everything, whether it be digitally or in real life, since they were born. It's not about being frugal, it's about spending money on what gets them value. They perceive value. Yet, the industry has largely ignored basically enabling that. And really, what we need to do to basically harness that is a lot of what you hear here at this conference, which is moving beyond the common planning and product-centric approach that the industry's taken for years, and focusing on basically helping them do what they need to do or what they want, which is self-actualize the best version of their lives. So it's twofold. It's those kids should be involved in the conversation from a young age, from when they're teenagers, from like start giving them the financial literacy stuff that is appealing to them. Start getting to know that you are the person that is taking care of mom and dad in a good way, and that they're going to basically be part of that conversation and help them, especially when they get to university. That's when the conversation really starts. And then basically develop content and support systems and a market and an approach that is going to know that so that they know that you're going to be there for them as they get older.
I agree with what Jason said, going back to who are you paying attention to? Your client is a family, and it's going to be to the detriment of the modern advisor to not be holding that in mind.
Yeah, and I think also with young investors, there is this popular notion that they're gunslingers, they're on Robinhood, et cetera, but they actually do quite deeply value financial advice. And an important thing, I think, is that advisors need to listen to precisely what they want, and as part of the advisory relationship, inject a heavy dose of education. They very much want to learn, and advisors should not fear that they might be over-empowering, if you will, the client and at risk of losing them. You won't. The rule of reciprocity should kick in. They will feel grateful. They'll want to work with you. They'll have more intelligent questions. It's a virtuous loop. So that's one of the interesting findings from this study, and which is also observable anecdotally and otherwise.
Right.
I think another thing to think about and appreciate that I'm really excited about that we're seeing with the next generation is these are individuals who are increasingly more comfortable working with someone to help them become a better version of themselves in different dimensions of their health and well-being. So I think about our well-being holistically. So we have our financial well-being, which is what the advisor is focused on, but then we have our emotional well-being, our spiritual well-being, and our physical well-being, and all of those things are going to directly and indirectly have an impact on financial well-being. So you now have a generation who there's less stigma. For instance, I'll talk about my industry. There's less stigma about saying, yeah, I'm seeing my therapist. So I think as we think about these different dimensions, it makes sense that someone is going to be thinking about, okay, if this is something that is important to me, I'm going to have someone help me in this area.
Right.
Yeah, and I'm going to add to that. And I think there's an interesting little Venn diagram of what's going on in the market right now. And it's first and foremost, you've heard AI at every session, so this is not going to be without exception. But we have an intergenerational wealth transfer that everybody's been seeing coming for a long time. We have artificial intelligence hitting this industry, and we have thought leaders giving full credit to Joy and Shaping Wealth and the other people in this space who have been telling us move beyond product, move towards human-centered advice about helping them basically fulfill their life ambitions in every way possible. That Venn diagram is overlapping, and we have this opportunity in the market. We have technology that is going to quite literally digitize and automate all the heavy lifting of what we think it is we do today, and the new advisor of the advisor of the future is one that is specifically around helping people self-actualize. And frankly, if you don't evolve away from the heavy lifting you're doing today and the product centricity and everything else, you don't have a choice, right? So the market wants this. The opportunity for financial growth is there because of the wealth transfer. The thought leadership is there, and the technology is enabling it. Mm-hmm. So,
right.
Well, there is a choice. The choice is, are you as an advisor going to be left behind?
Yeah, it's an easy choice.
I just want to add in terms of this self-actualization, I think it's important that advisors really try to have the client be as precise as possible with the vision that they have of the future. And admittedly, it's far harder, of course, if you're young. The future looks a lot more nebulous. But regardless, to the extent you can be clear about where you want to live, the kind of house, the kind of job, the commute, all of that will help the client get to where they want to go, and likely keep the client happy and help with retention as a byproduct.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it seems like these younger generations, you can kind of see on the screen, Gen Z, millennials, and even part of the Generation Xers, my generation, have kind of expect guidance in all parts of their lives, whether that's choosing a school or mental health, emotional well-being, or financial advice, right? So they're really keen to actually get help, whereas the older generations really are more focused on education or the lack of current knowledge of product, right? And so they're like, at this stage of my life, I really do need guidance because I can't afford to make a mistake at this point. Right?
I also think this is partially informed by both the expectation and experience of both cohorts when it comes to this industry specifically. So the boomers and the silent generation, of course, they were the ones who dealt with the 1980 shenanigans of high fees and all the lack of disclosure and all the crazy stuff in every Hollywood movie you see about this industry. So is it any wonder they're less likely to trust the industry? Whereas the younger generation sees the current marketing around, we're here to help you with your life. We're helping you with all life's ambitions and all this other stuff. So to them, that's been the norm. So frankly, the only thing this industry needs to do is stand up and actually live up to that promise to actually get these people to adopt what it is we've been saying we're going to do for them.
So Jason, you said such an important word, and that is trust. So advisors need to be thinking about, what am I doing to intentionally build trust and develop self-awareness around what are things I may be doing inadvertently that are breaking or eroding trust. And then being able to recognize when that is happening and repair that.
Yeah, I just want to add, trust is incredibly important, and it's not enough to have a fancy pedigree, advanced degrees from the best schools. Increasingly at a certain level, that's table stakes. Establishing trust is partly a function of EQ, situational awareness, and common sense.
Right. Using your brain, not AI at times. Okay. Any other comments from the panel on that, or we'll move
One last
kind of
piece,
forward?
right? And let's just talk about from a business standpoint and a greed standpoint for advisors, okay? At the end of the day, there is no defensible moat other than your relationship with the client. And people have largely been saying that for a long time, but clearly the industry on the whole has not listened. Again, back to the artificial intelligence piece. We're all going to have all these different versions of table stakes. And for anyone who saw the Conquest demo, and yes, these guys are friends of mine, look at what you saw there. That software will enable the dumbest advisor to produce a plan of value, quite honestly, and enable good advisors to produce better ones. So when a financial plan can be produced at a button push, right, everything's commoditized. So really it's about the bridge between the data, the output, the complexity of the industry, and the human being.
Absolutely. I believe that to your point, it is EQ that is going to be the differentiator between who succeeds in the industry and who gets left behind. Because that relationship with the client, that is the agent for change.
Okay, great. No, that's great. I think if there's any questions, you can send them in, and we'll try to address them. But let's move on to our second question that we have for the panel. And this is around communication. And the Dow Jones study that we conducted clearly showed across every single country, again, the US, the UK, and Canada, that investors expect to hear a lot more frequently than from their advisors than they do today. So it's a little more simple of a question, and all of them wanted to hear from their advisor weekly, regardless of age, demographic, any demographic you want to choose. So how do we communicate? Now, again, sorry, they wanted to hear more frequently as long as those communications were relevant to them. Big difference, and this is really what we're going to talk about. So how do you communicate to all different generations in a relevant way? How do you stay relevant with older and younger generations? And let's open that up, and we'll start with Greg.
Well, yeah, the first thing is to directionally communicate more often than not. To the extent you tailor it for your clients, the messaging, the better. There are many ways you can do it. You could do videos, you could do newsletter, social media should be a part of it. But the worst thing you can do is to lay low, particularly when times are rough. And I'm paraphrasing. Someone said the best time to call the client is when the phone feels heaviest, right? And I think there's a lot of truth to that. So,
I think it's really important to meet your client where they are at. So, and this is where empathy comes in and perspective taking and thinking, oh, what does my client want? Not what would I want, what would I appreciate? And sometimes, you may think about different channels. Okay, where are different age groups at? But it's useful to also check in with clients about what are your preferred modes of and frequency of communication. Because to that point, it's really important that you are creating signal, not noise. Because if you are creating noise and giving them messaging that they don't care about, and you're pinging them too often, that's going to annoy them, and that will have an impact on the relationship.
That's right. Actually, I would add that as an addendum. Approach that at the beginning. But generically, I would say directionally more. But of course, talk to them and find out what they prefer, how they like. Some people prefer text. Others are like, don't ever text me. So it's very individual, and solicit that input as soon as possible.
Yeah, and I think technology is helpful there once you've chosen the channels and remember those things. But that's great intel. Jason?
I think I'm going to build on that, but say it's twofold. A, there's the things that we directly control versus what we automate. And what we directly control, absolutely, there has to be a client preference as to that. Like, if they don't want to be hassled every quarter and they just want to meet semi-annually, that's their preference. That's fine. We have to control that. But the technology side is a lot of it's opt-in, right? They want to be off our newsletter, they can hit a link. They want to follow me on Twitter, they can do that. They have those options, right? But I think the most important thing, it's the old saying, you get zero credit for the shots you didn't take, right? You have to take those shots. And luckily there's platforms out there that are omni-channel. We can blast out or we can automate this. I mean, plug Kevin's company, but the reality is I've got automated tweets and LinkedIn posts going out daily. I've got weekly newsletters going out, and it's, and I scan them all to make sure that it's relevant to my audience, to make sure that it's actually there. Now, across generations, the challenge is different because they care about different things. So this is where I think we're going to see artificial intelligence and the evolution of these tools start to specifically serve up not a newsletter, but multiple newsletters automatically targeted at different demos, right? But I will say, and I will caution here, okay? There was a statement made at a different panel about how, now AI is going to allow us to create this plethora of content to service every niche and whatnot. Great for a large-scale enterprise, horrid for an advisory practice. Why? Because the last thing I want going out is basically blast about everything under the sun to appeal to everybody, targeted at them, only to have these prospects call me, and I have no idea what the topic matter is. Right? Like, failure.
Right, and I think we even see that at AdvisorStream. We deliver hundreds of millions of pieces of content a month on behalf of thousands and thousands of advisors to their clients. And it's very interesting that when you see weekly newsletter-type communications, they do achieve great engagement rates, open and view rates. But when you see the hyper-targeted communications where you're sending a curated piece of content to an individual, they get twice as high engagement rate. So it's, it makes sense.
And I'll add, I think, in my home country of Canada, I've seen the statistic for my entire career, and I'm pretty sure I've seen somewhere in the US, the number one reason advisors get fired, lack of communication, right?
It is, yes.
So, and given the fact it is so easy to automate I'll divide it into presence versus active presence. So presence is just the automated stuff that goes out and you're seeing me all the time. I'm there, right? And then there's the intentional stuff where I reach out directly, where it's more customized, where it's specific to them. I'm sending you an article of interest. I'm checking in on you. I'm just texting you to see how you're doing because it's been 3 months since we chatted, right? The combination of both is lightning in a bottle, and no client should ever leave you for lack of communication.
Yeah, it's often a surprise to advisors still that there's a great Vanguard study that came out a couple years ago, and there's others. McKinsey had one similar. But it showed that the number one reason that investors will leave their advisor is perceived high fees, right? And then the third most cited reason that an investor will leave their advisor is perceived bad performance. But the second is lack of communication, which is completely, in the control of every advisor.
But consider how 1 and 2 are probably related.
Right.
Perceived cost versus believed communication, which is basically part of the value proposition.
Yeah, and I think it goes to what Greg was saying about education. You definitely, by communicating a lot and tailoring that information, your perceived value goes up and the focus on fees goes down, right?
And I'll add one last anecdote. I think back to the last market correction, right? Now, our regular cycle is to basically be with every client quarterly. Meetings already in the books, right? market hit the fan, right? Newsletters were basically tailored around that.
Yep.
Social media blasts were tailored about that. I had no one calling me in panic.
Right.
And when getting on the phone, it was like, yeah, I know things are bad. I don't know how bad they are, but I knew we had this call booked.
Yep.
Right? So they already had the reassurance that communication was not only going out, but it was happening specific to them.
Interesting. Okay, I think we're going to move on to kind of the third question of the panel. And basically, we are going to discuss, get to it here. Yeah, about personalization. So we're going to continue on that personalization conversation right now. And this is near and dear to my heart. I've been working on it for over 10 years, personalizing client communications. But what is interesting that we found in the study with Dow Jones is that advisors, we asked, how could advisors provide more value to you, to the 1,300 investors in the 3 countries? And what was interesting was, number one, they said, by providing ongoing education on emerging trends and financial topics. Second was for an advisor to truly understand my and my family's goals a little bit more clearly. And last but not least, by sending personalized, tailored content to those goals and needs. So I think we've already started this conversation, but let's continue it here. Let's talk a little bit about what personalization actually means in the modern era, especially with things like AI. And people are fairly intelligent, right? They know when things are being crafted by, I believe they know still, when things are being crafted by machines and when they're not. But I'll open it up just to anyone at all. What does personalization mean for advisors in this modern era of investing?
What comes to mind for me is the importance of becoming a student of your client and asking the kinds of questions that are going to get the information that help you understand the story of the person in front of you. What makes you tick? What are your dreams? What are your goals? What do you fear? And I think it's the quality of, going back to communication, the quality of communication matters just as much as the frequency. So we really want to be having conversations with clients about the things that matter to them. And that's going to span far beyond the numbers. So it's important that advisors have the skill set to be able to handle that emotional side, because when clients are coming in talking to you about their financial situation, they aren't just talking to you about what is happening in their bank account. They are talking to you about their lives.
I'd also add that don't assume your client may know everything. To the extent you can, break things down on a more elemental level so ideas are tangible and palpable. They want transparency. They want to understand process. An article for them like, what does an investment banker do? A day in the life of kind of thing resonates because you're demystifying it. You're showing, you're telling, you're giving them a taste of what it's like, and they'll go, aha, I'm getting it. And to have that engagement, there needs to be the genuine connection and understanding. At the same time, you don't want to insult their intelligence, so you just want to kind of suss them out, feel them out, and see where they are, and then accordingly calibrate your words to ensure that they get the point. But I think that really goes hand in hand with the education. It's also, if you widen the lens and look at the news environment we have, and people have trouble agreeing on anything, and especially for younger people, of course they want to empower themselves with information. So the extent you can give them, the basic tools, if you will, to navigate a fast-moving modern financial landscape, the better.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. You talk about, sending an article, Day in Life Investment Banker, and you talk about the quality is probably more important than the frequency or the quantity of information. In this study, and we're not highlighting it on slides, 85% of investors in all 3 countries said the number one source of information for personal financial decision-making was actually third-party, objectively fact-checked content. So I think it is important. The quality is there. The credibility is there, maybe over the frequency and the quantity. It's Jason.
I'm actually glad I went last on this one because both other speakers gave me points to work on. So first off, I'll say, to me, I read this and I see all 3 questions, and the only message I get is, from a client standpoint, it's all about me, is what they're saying, right? So 2 of those are very obvious, obvious, but even the education piece, right? What they're saying is that, look, I need to be reassured, right? I need to know enough to feel reassured, right? So this is all about them, right? So keep in mind that. So the second piece is further what Joy said. Now, one of the things about technology, which I love, is that people will go too far, right? And I think there's a real danger with solely relying upon the digital signals we're getting or digital listening we're getting or what clicks on what articles we're getting as being the primary provider of understanding of that client, right? And I think, when I talk to industry, a lot of times they're like, oh, this will enable advisors to service more clients. Yet meanwhile, the trend in the RIA market's been the opposite direction, right? It's been smaller and deeper, and that's going to be the trend, because the reality is that we can scale technology, we can't scale the human mind,
right?
And the need to understand the deep, resonating issues in them, right down to their financial, emotional trauma of childhood, if it comes down to it, is so pertinent to understanding and servicing these core needs. Right. That it's necessary. And we're not going to get that signal from technology. And then lastly, about the education piece, I think the other thing is I think too often this industry tries to show how smart it is by doing the data dump, right? Talking over clients. And I always say that the best way to handle education is distillation, right? You don't drop the bottle of booze on them on their head, right? You give them a tiny shot glass, right? So you give them the education should be very rudimentary, basic understanding, that they understand the fundamental concepts, but you have to be ready to dive deep into the technical and support the fact check stuff. So your understanding is a giant distillery vat that you put in a presentation that is a bottle that you would then deliver as a shot glass is the way to look at it.
Yeah. I think what we're hearing often across our different clients is they finally have the technology through platforms like ours and others to treat everyone as a segment of one, right? Don't say because someone's a female and they're 28 years old and they live on the West Coast or the East Coast that I'll just dump them in here, or they're my golf buddies or my clients' children. And that's where I think technology can be powerful. It helps you see what they're opening, what they're reading, and what their real needs and focuses are right now. So I'm just going to go back to you for a second, Jason. So to me, it seems like you do need the technology. If you want to serve everyone at that, but I know the brain is unscalable, but where do you find the happy medium of using technology and then using your brains and that EQ to really service people in a personalized way?
But the ridiculous dichotomy of what we typically try to frame is like, is it human or machine? And the answer is it's not. The harmony of both beats either one individually every time.
Yeah, okay. So personalization you could take in all kinds of different ways. One of the things we're seeing too is if you send irrelevant information or not treating someone as a segment of one, not really having the intelligence to know what's important to that, what the goals are, what the life events are, what's important, that you can lose clients. And the younger generations, again, in this study, we are not highlighting it, people will leave advisors because they feel they just don't know them. And that can often happen from content you're sending, right? So we believe there's a balance there. Any other comments around personalization? Greg, you want to make? Joy? Or we'll kind of move on to our next question. Okay, great.
I'm just going to make one comment on that.
Go ahead.
And I think it's anecdotal. And it comes from personal experience about basically meeting with kids at different life stages. And I think there's a sweet spot. I think there's a moment we lose them, right? And you got to be careful about that. So getting them young, pre-university, in university, after, like immediately first job, you get that. If you're there for that early life stage and they've gotten used to seeing you dealing with their parents, you're good. I think in a lot of cases, and they're going to rely on you going forward because as they evolve and you meet that need, you're good. The danger is when you don't capture them and they've gotten out into the world and they've gotten the wrong advice or whatever else it is, or think they can do it themselves, and they're swallowing the media of, hey, you don't need an advisor, or look at the negatives, right? Those ones are hard to convert, right? Until they reach that part in their life when the complexity of them having kids and the mortgage and all this other stuff hits them in the face and they realize they're not. So there's a gap there. So I would say that back to the personalization,
right.
I don't know how you break through that piece, but I know that, again, it's not just the demographic, it's the evolution of them over time.
Okay, interesting. So we're going to continue on in this kind of fourth and last area question for the panel. Again, it's going to bring up that theme of education. But we really looked at why different age groups or different investment demographics choose to work with an advisor. We kind of opened up with the fact that Gen Z, millennials, and even partly the Xers value advisors much more than the older generations, which is kind of counterintuitive to the industry, or it has been in the past. But we're going to continue on with the importance of referrals and why people choose to work with different groups. So you can see on the screen, it's very clear cut, and that's why we chose to highlight this, that the different generations choose to work with advisors for different reasons. Referrals remain extremely important, always will be, always have been. So we're going to talk about how you make yourself referable to this younger generation. But it's interesting, the lack of knowledge that we talked about or the perceived by the investor that as they get older, they may not know enough about the new products, what's going on in the marketplace, and they don't want to make those mistakes at a late stage in their lives. So the question is, well, first off, what we found in this study was that the younger generations almost solely will work with an advisor if a specific advisor has been referred to them. So that's how important peer recommendations are for younger generations, and that's not a surprise, I don't think. And then again, older generations just want knowledge. They don't always do what their friends tell them to do. So the question being, how do you provide ongoing education, and at the same time, how do you make position yourself as referable? And these are questions we've been asking each other since, for 20 years. But again, I'll open it up. How do you provide ongoing education that's relevant? And how do you make sure you're positioned so that your clients will refer you, particularly your younger clients?
I want to speak to that second question about how do you make yourself referable. You are referable because of your relationship. A 27-year-old is not going to be talking to their colleague at work saying, this guy really helped me beat the market. No, that's not what that conversation is going to be. It's going to be, this is someone I'm comfortable with. This is someone I enjoy talking to. This is someone who gets me, and you're similar to me, so they might understand you too. And it really goes back to this theme of, this is someone I trust. Because people, we're all busy. It's hard finding a match. So if there is someone you are friends with and you're like, okay, that was a good fit for you, it might be a good fit for me. And the fit is not about performance. It is about the personal relationship.
I want to add something about referrals, but this is more for older clients. Ideally, you will have if your firm will have a niche or a distinct identity to help differentiate yourself, because many clients see this ocean of faceless advisors in suits, and their eyes glaze over, and they don't know where to begin. So really having an identity, a key market that you serve, is important. And the referral question is obviously potentially fraught with awkwardness. The client's reluctant to ask, or they may have a minimum of assets, and you're not going to go to your friend, hey, do you have $500,000? And if they don't, it's right. So there's the financial dimension. But to that point, if you serve, let's say, small business owners, or it's vocational, or it's situational, then there's less, if any, awkwardness, and the referrals can become more seamless.
Right.
Yeah. I feel like I should go third every time because I always want to build off what they're saying because it's so good. So, relationship, absolutely the core, but I'll also add to that one of the things I talk about when I talk about technology is how badly this industry has leveraged technology to enhance the experience, right? And I still am astonished by advisors who basically, in the Zoom world, they've gone from sitting down next to a client with a paper statement to sitting down with the client on a Zoom screen with a PDF statement, and not using some of the tools that exist to engage and make it dynamic and basically let them drive the conversation. So here's what happened. Oh, but what happened? Why was there that dip? Okay, great. Let's go back and look at the allocation. There's tools out there that will now let you have dynamic conversations and collaborative conversations to come to solutions, whether that be in estate planning or your portfolio, you name it. And I think it's imperative that we need to look, this job is in part, yes, technical, in part human thinking, in part theater. And the experience, it doesn't take away from the validity or the sincerity of it all, but making it engaging just brings them into the conversation more. And we don't do a good enough job of that. And a lot of the tech design to date has been about solving our administrative problems, not about making the client delighted. And that's what needs to change.
That's a great point that's rarely talked about. If you're you can dispatch amazing advice, but if you're gonna drone on in a monotone, there's a high probability you will lose that client's attention, if not business. So to your point about being engaging, you don't have to be a wackadoodle, and whatever.
Just have fun.
Please don't.
But you can
Don't
go
be weird.
a little
That's your
bit.
takeaway from this
You don't want to
conference.
lose them. You don't want to watch them looking at their clock and whatnot. But just make sure they're following you and you're in the moment with them.
Totally. And to build off your point on differentiation, this industry does a terrible job of differentiating itself on average, right? Like this to me screams like, I don't know who to trust. How am I going to know who to trust? And we do such a bad job in general. I'm going to say in general because I've seen some fantastic jobs specifically around niche marketing and the way social media gets handled around that. And I have many friends who've done astonishing jobs in that regard. But like we do such a bad job of letting people get to know us and what we stand for and what we do before they engage us, right? And this is one of the bigger trends that Michael Kitces is always talking about is the growth rates of niche firms. Rightly so, because it's less likely to require someone else to validate me because I don't know where to turn, where I'm going to go, than if you land on a website that's designed specifically for that type of person that you are,
right.
And then you basically say, oh, wait a sec, like I'm in that career, I am this I am this gender, I'm in this life stage, whatever it is, and oh my God, all these problems are the problems I have. Okay, this is interesting. Let me Google the person. Oh, look, here's their Twitter feed. And I can see, Josh Brown said years ago on a podcast, I wouldn't invest with anyone who is not on Twitter, right? If you're not willing to put yourself out there publicly about what you believe and stand for and your values constantly, then you don't know who the heck it is you're dealing with, right? So the best sales, right? And I'll go back one step. Too often, advisor marketing is designed around, let me give them a little bit so they call me so I can close them. No, what do you do? What else in your life do you do that with, right? You make the purchase decision online for everything before you basically go to close, right? We need to shift our thinking into basically give them everything that gives them the reason for why they should be dealing with us.
Well, let me ask you a question about that, because there's a big debate right now about the new marketing rules, right? Using ads about your performance. So let's talk about that for a second, because that's a danger, putting everything out there. And I heard this conversation multiple times over the last few days, and even doing some interviews around the new marketing rules about performance and putting your performance out there on ads. But it's a very dangerous thing. And,
sure, but is that what matters? Like back to what we were talking about this entire time.
That's why I brought up this Joy's statement there, is it's not about performance. We know performance is actually the third ranked thing for why clients will leave, as we talked about. But what's your view as an active advisor on putting your performance, you said put everything out there online. Would you put your performance out there?
Look, I mean,
seems like a dangerous way to market.
You got it, put it up there. Like there's a wonderful book on content marketing by a man named Marcus Sheridan called They Ask You Answer. And he built a just gangbuster profitable pool installation company just through content marketing. And the two blog posts that drive the most traffic are, what does it cost to build a pool? Because no one wants to talk about that. The other one is, if here are other people who recommend for different types of pool or the same type of pool in my area. He's recommending his competition, and they're closing on him. Why? Because someone who's confident enough to do that and contrast what they do to someone else's experience, if your experience is coming through on the website, so people are comfortable with you. So the reality is, yes, if clients are asking you a question in a meeting, prospects are asking you a question in a meeting, that is material for you to write about and put out into the universe so that they select into that. And guess what? Performance. Look, man, you said you used the term active advisor. I'm not an active management advisor. I will take the academic side on this every time and say, hey, that's not a sustainable moat. But what is a sustainable moat is everything else we do if we do it right and specifically speak to one type of person.
Right. So, and just on referrals, because we're talking about referrals, they say engage is another study, not to quote too many studies. There's Vanguard study on what does engagement do for advisors with their clients. And it showed that when a client truly feels engaged, is opening the communications you send them and then reading the content within them, that their retention rates go up by 2 times, but their willingness to refer goes up 5 times. So if referrals are truly important for the next generation of investors that you need to future-proof yourself with, if you want to get away from the 87% of younger investors who don't want to work with their parents' advisors, you need to be engaging. By being engaging, they will bring you their friends and their network and their peers. Any comments on that by anyone on going after this younger generation and getting those referrals?
Make a quick one.
Okay, you do a quick one, then we'll pass.
Do we really think that people out there are actively thinking about how do I refer more people to Jason? No.
Yeah.
Right? Like the reality is, and I'm always cringed at we get paid in 2 ways. We get paid by fees and we get paid by the people you introduce us to.
Yeah.
right? No one wants that pressure. The reality is that happy, satisfied clients, they will refer you when somebody else in their circle complains about a problem that you solve for them.
Right.
Right? What you want to be referable, the best way to be referable is to deliver a service that makes that client love you.
Make clients love you. Okay, I like that. We're going to open it up for questions from anyone in just a minute, but before we do, any other comments that you guys want to make on that last question? Okay, so we will open it up. We've got a good crowd here. Any questions on referring, on anything we've talked about here? Anybody want to ask any of our experts while we have them up on stage? Any questions at all? Let's pick on someone. How about Craig Isovitz? There we go.
Yeah, I guess I go back to the personalization of weekly communications, but also having quality. I mean, how do you really, we have so many other roles and responsibilities. How do you really define that and do that effectively, consistently?
I mean, I jump in there because that's what AdvisorStream does, and there's other platforms that do that. I think you need to learn or lean on technology. You do need to, we use AI, but that word gets usually used, especially around marketing. We use consumption profiles to monitor what every single client is reading and watching and listening to, and your prospects, and then we algorithmically curate. So we're doing that. So lean on technology. You don't have time to do all this. For example, we work with Barron's and Wall Street Journal and all the other top publishers, and we'll take each individually, personally, each client and each prospect and say, what's important to them right now? And that changes over time. And the platform will find out what they're focused on right now and then go algorithmically curate a Barron's article, a Wall Street Journal article, an Economist infographic, a Bloomberg video to help you so you don't have to go out there and find content for each and every client. At the end of the day, that's just part of your job, and it gets people awake. You're giving them that ongoing education. You're actually telling them you care about them. It's our technology figuring out what's really top of mind. But I think you have to, as Jason said earlier, lean on technology and your own brain and your own ability to have a high level of EQ. But Jason, you said?
Start with that type of solution, and then you have to layer on your own personal stuff on top of that, right? So it's basically, that solves the fact that you are present, ever present, and it gives you relevance. But real relevance is your real client problems that you are really solving that you write about. And that doesn't have to be every day. Could be every week, could be every month. But you augment what's automated with the personal.
Yeah, I could not agree more with that. But technology is good to allow you to do the things that you need to do well, right? And I think that's true in every single industry around. But we're going to open up for any more questions, and then we are going to end on time. I think Joy's got to race to the airport to go back to Germany.
I need to fly to Germany. Yeah. So it was lovely to see you all.
So
I hope you enjoyed the conference.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.